Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying time is here. That's right, we're talking about Exorcist III on Kill by Kill. Well, greetings and salutations, Internet's your old pal, Patrick Hamilton, coming to you once again from our favorite little hamlet, Georgetown. This is the Kill by Kill podcast, where we are dedicated to celebrating the least discussed component of any horror film, the characters. And we're going to unpack all the goriest of details of William Peter Blatty's Exorcist III, Legion. There's a lot of titles going on in it, depending on which one you're watching, in the hopes that a pre-untimely end is just the beginning of the jokes that we can make at their expense. And as always, there's only one person I trust that if I need to get all the blood out of my body, she will make sure to pump my legs extra hard to get every last drop. The one, the only, Gina Radcliffe. How are you doing today, Gina?
I mean, that's showmanship.
Right.
I'll tell you, I was trying to think of so many clever ways that I could reference the movie and my greetings. And there's too much. I was just thinking of, I could tell you I was here to repair your radio.
Sure. Yeah.
I could tell you that I can't go home until the carpet's asleep. There's so many ways I could do it. There could be so many outtakes.
Listen, none of us can go home until the carpet's asleep, because if you do, you're gonna kill it.
It swims up and down.
Listen, we're going to talk all about that carp, my favorite monologue in all of cinema. But before we do, Gina, I don't want to alarm you, but we are not alone. That's right. We have a special guest. You, of course, know him from his many years as a writer, a film critic, a culture writer at large. He has 2 newsletters on Substack right now for your reading enjoyment. The one, the only, Drew McWeeny. How are you doing today, Drew?
I am very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
I'm so happy to have you here, especially for this motion picture, which I figured because you have spoken so much about the 80s, but this is just beyond the pale into the 90s. It's a whole new realm.
I actually was a theater manager when this came out, and we played it at our theater to largely empty auditoriums. And it gave me a chance to kind of study the movie. Yeah. And my big takeaway at the end of the 2.5 weeks we had it was that movie is crazy. So
it absolutely is. It's bug nuts, but such a different version of crazy than Exorcist II, which we covered a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
Which there's, spitting a hidden tomato out of your mouth. That's Exorcist II, right? And then there's this where it's more like a comedy presentation. It's really about banter and back and forth and acting moments and just giving everything breath. All of the tension comes from mood, atmosphere, and performance. And rather than, watching a locust in close up fly lazily across all of quote unquote Africa.
Well, I think there's a huge difference in the type of Catholicism that you've got in John Boorman's background and William Peter Blatty, who William Peter Blatty is still wrestling with it in a very real and ongoing manner when he's making this movie. Whereas I think Boorman just has that Irish attitude of he is done with it and we'll truck none of that nonsense. So it's, different approaches, definitely.
Yes. And so, the sort of background of how this comes about, Morgan Creek, a production company, I believe at the time they were under 20th Century Fox, they somehow come about the rights to either just The Exorcist in general or specifically William Peter Blatty's Legion novel, which is a sort of spiritual sequel in a very literal sense to his original Exorcist. And so in an effort, they think because The Exorcist has so much cultural cachet, despite what happened in 1978 with Boorman, they're like, let's take another swing at this. I think they approached Billy Friedkin at some point, and he's like, no, he kind of falls out of the project, even though him and Blatty kind of have a great camaraderie over the years, a rivalry at points, but they generally appreciate what the other one brings to the table. And finally,
they're good sparring partners, definitely.
Yes, they engage in a way intellectually that the other one feeds off of. Whether they agree, whether they disagree, they at least have a mutual respect society going on. But Blatty's not a stranger to the director's chair. And if people in the audience have not had the opportunity to watch The Ninth Configuration, I think this has and The Ninth Configuration have a lot in common beyond just William Peter Blatty being the director.
Well, there's the whole ensemble. He definitely, it feels like a dry run for this in some ways, and sort of the dynamics he plays with. And he picks so many of his cast members from The Ninth Configuration to be in this. And it's weird. They're a decade apart, and you feel, and in that time, like a lot of people would become radically different filmmakers. You can see how the exact same concerns and the exact same thoughts and the exact same process leads to each of these films. He is a messy filmmaker. He does not think of things in sort of that elegant, big picture way. It feels like every scene he's just in there kind of scrapping it out from the beginning of that scene. Like he has no master plan, but that's kind of the charm of his movies.
There's a spontaneity to them. There's both a reality and an unreality to them. Here, it is said on the set that he didn't do a lot of second or third takes. There was a lot of one and dones. Like, we got it, moving on. And that's a joke we often play with on our show. The got it, moving on when we find something incongruous. But for whatever reason with Blatty, he seems to enjoy that. Well, we got it once and that works for me. And when we put it together, if it's disconcerting, well, great. That's what the mood I'm going for.
Right. Which is, I was going to say, everything feels very nightmarish.
Yes.
Like, it looks like, a normal place, but you've got just random stuff happening in the background. Like, I can't tell you how many times I watch this and I keep seeing different things each time. Like there's a scene where they're just panning through like a hospital and there's a nun and she's making these like hand gestures. And I'm like, is she gesturing at someone? She sort of looks like she's doing that, that code where you kind of move your arms around, but there's no one with her.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is that something she's just doing on her own? Was she directed to do that? But it's just so many disconcerting, is that really happening or is that not really happening?
Yeah. I feel like that's a big part of this. Like if there was a lot of dream logic happening in Borman's film, here it is debatable how much is happening in reality and how much is an artificial creation of nightmares. I agree with you that the nun in the middle of the hallway there, after they've discovered Dyer's body, is just like, it has nothing to do with other than the fact that maybe whatever is happening with patient X, who we've yet to meet at that point, is just infecting. It's corrupting those who are just vulnerable enough to hear his radio signal. And when you put all of it together, like for me, yes, I agree with you, Drew. This is messy. The Ninth Configuration is messy. It's got that sort of has that 70s Altman vibe to it to a degree where stuff is just happening and we happen to be filming it when it does. That kind of feel.
And I think when you talk about that one and done approach, it's one of the reasons that I think he puts this kind of ensemble together, this kind of cast together. You got guys like George C. Scott and Ed Flanders, who these are really solid theater background actors who every single time you roll, they're going to be ready and they're going to give you something. Yeah. And it'll probably be a little different every time. With George C. Scott, that's part of the magic of this performance. And I'm going to go ahead and call it magic because wow, what a performance. And you've got J. Lee Cobb as Kinderman in the original and a terrific performance, a great character. I think he and Jason Miller together, I think Jason Miller's a wildly underrated actor to begin with. And I think their scenes are really terrific and sad. And there's this wonderful friendship between them, which lends real weight to what Kinderman says here, that Karras was his best friend and that he wants to help Karras, that's what pulls him in. Yeah. But that unevenness and sort of that ragged thing and the surreality even goes to the way this was produced. The fact that there was some studio tampering that Jason Miller wasn't originally in some of what they shot, and then they insisted that they put some Jason Miller in. And so you get Jason Miller sort of randomly dropped in places. And if anything, it makes it more surreal and disconcerting because it feels like reality itself is a little broken, the way it works inside that room. Once you get into the room with Patient X, things just aren't right. And I kind of love the fact that some of that is by design, and some of that is almost like, well, this is what we have to work with, so I'm just going to kind of figure out how to cut it. And it ends up working really well for him. I think it becomes very heightened and very disconcerting and upsetting.
Yeah. I mean, it starts right from the beginning when you have that little piece of dialogue that happens an hour later in the movie about falling down a long flight of steps. But when you're first introduced to the young boy who we later discover has been killed, we see him twice. You pass by him on the sidewalk once, and he's kind of in the vestibule of a building. And then you continue down that block, and all of a sudden he's there again with a rose in his hand. So which one was real? And already you're unmoored. I don't know that I picked that up the first time I saw it at the Burbank 12 AMC, which is now a parking lot. But every time I see it, Gina, I'm like you. I always catch something yet again or rediscover something that I didn't quite grasp the first time that just makes this pop. It is both intentional and accidental and unnerving because you don't know what is real.
Right, exactly. And that just, much like the first movie, it just creates such a good sense of unease. But here it's heightened by some of it's just funny too.
Yes.
I saw it in the theater as well. And like Drew, was mostly empty theater, but a moment that got a huge laugh, and it's still funny, but also deeply unsettling, is when that old lady is crawling around that ceiling.
Oh my God, yeah.
And it's because she looks like a little bug. Because again, like the spider walk, it's sped up.
Yeah.
And it's so just like, what the fuck? and all I can do is just sort of nervously laugh, like, what is happening? Why is she on the ceiling?
Watching the same thing happening I think it's like a collective delusion.
I was going to say, I think that's the thing that is so odd about this film is that some of the visuals are almost high camp. They're so strange and they're so outrageous. Yeah. But the subject matter itself, he takes faith so seriously that once you get into the conversations about who Patient X is and why this is happening, none of that stuff is campy at all. And so I think that dissonance between those tones is another part of what leaves an audience going, I don't know how to react. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. Am I allowed to laugh at some of this? And yeah, you are. I think Blady he's not unintentionally funny. He has a wicked sense of humor. I do think some of this stuff is supposed to kind of make you laugh and put you off balance.
Yeah. I mean, there's the entire back and forth. There's a banter happening between, Kinderman and and Father Dyer, where he's visiting him in the hospital. He's nervous about it. He runs off where Dyer can't see him. He literally runs into the scene and then collects himself and walks in. He's that nervous that he might lose another friend. Like he's at the end of his rope. And then they have this extended run of like this weird, like, why are you reading women's wear daily? And why aren't you reading the Bible? It's like the Bible doesn't have the latest fashions in it. And here you're getting everything that, Blatty had said once he had written The Exorcist and had become so huge that it had killed his comedy career. And here you see all of his comedy chops roaring right back into this, like it's a Lost Thin Man sequel.
Well, and George C. Scott as well. George C. Scott is hilarious in big chunks of this film. And he knows exactly what meal he's having. And we referred at the beginning of this to the carp scene. That's one of the greatest weird dialogue left turns. It's a tasty fish. I've got nothing against it. He's so good in that moment. I love him. And he nails the ending of that scene.
And you can see like Ed Flanders like really trying hard not to laugh.
Oh, it makes you wonder. It's like, did Ed Flanders know all of what was coming? Because it's the little details that really, it's the swimming up and down. It's so good. And yeah, and he is well aware that Kinderman is, and Kinderman, when he's having to listen to other cops, Kinderman is rolling his eyes so loudly you can hear them rolling around in his skull. Like, he can't believe how dumb some of his other policemen are. So all of that stuff, I think, lands as comedy, which is why and I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Changeling with George C. Scott.
Oh, yes, of course.
Beautiful, beautiful movie. And I think what he does so well in that and in this is he never plays scared, and he never plays, I don't believe this. He plays more like, I don't really understand what's happening, and I think I'm curious, and I'm going to keep pushing forward until I have an answer. And it's a weird thing to play because he's never selling you horror. And I think that's why it works, because he's not overplaying it. He's not tipping his hand that you're supposed to be afraid here.
I also feel like a lot of this has to do with an existential crisis that Kinderman is already having in process when all this stuff happens. Like, he's already dissatisfied with the world as it currently works. He just, while he may have had many, back and forth with Dyer about the existence of God and how it could possibly, the world can continue on in such a way that allows suffering to occur. It's just reached a point where if he sees one more dead kid, like, he doesn't know what he's going to do.
It's No Country for Possessed Old Men.
Right. Exactly. And this is where I feel like Blatty really understands, of course, because he was the source material for the original Exorcist and was a part of that creative process in making the movie. So, of course, he understands at the core what that film is about. Because Reagan is going through this, the point of it is to make everyone else lose faith, everyone else begin to doubt, and allow their suffering to fuel, the plot point of The Exorcist.
It's provocative because you don't have to be afraid of it to understand why it's a violation. Like, the notion of taking your faith away from you, I don't have to share your faith for that to be upsetting. Yes.
I think it's having a bigger conversation than I think a lot of people are used to having at the cinema currently. So, and I also feel like so much of the world is tilted in terms of how much religion you're exposed to, and not seeing it in a crowded theater where that sort of mass hysteria begins to take hold. We mentioned it in the Exorcist episode that we did, but there's this cultural impact of the Exorcist documentary, which they just go to Westwood and sit in the lobby and watch people both go into the theater and then rush out, being woken up with smelling salts. Like, it just affected people. They became unmoored, and collectively you can do that. Yeah.
When did the both of you see it? How old were you? And did you see it in a theater? Did you see it at home?
What, the original?
The first one.
Oh, I mean, I was a little kid. I was a baby when it came out. And then I saw when I'd seen it on TV as a child. And then I saw when they did the version you've never seen. I think that was maybe 2000. So I would have been in my late 20s then.
And I didn't catch it until my video store days, probably right before going to the AMC 12 to see The Exorcist 3.
Wow. When it came out, I didn't see the first run, but there was a second theatrical release a couple of years later. It was probably for the sequel. It was probably right before the sequel came out. Mm-hmm. And I had a babysitter who took me.
Oh my God.
I was 7 years old and I saw it in theater.
Holy shit. Did she get hired?
Documentary.
Did she get hired back again after that?
Oh no. She was not allowed around us again. And I didn't sleep for like a week. It was unreal, the impact that movie had. It landed on me really, really hard.
Yeah, I saw it on TV when I was about 8 or 9. That was enough on its own. And then later I saw all the stuff that had been cut. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's even worse than I imagined.
Yeah, I mean,
and so
my first exposure to it would have been Mad Magazine. And reprints of Mad Magazine. And then there was this sort of syndicated 20th Century Fox half hour that Ed Bosley would do voiceovers for. And it would basically be That's Entertainment for just 20th Century Fox.
Yeah,
and they would
remember
go
that.
through themes. And they had one that encompassed films just beyond 20th Century Fox. For whatever reason, they had some clips of The Exorcist, probably What a Wonderful Day for an Exorcism. And that was enough for me, man. I was a scaredy fucking cat. That put me over the edge. Like, I was not going to get anywhere near this movie for, another decade.
Well, I didn't go near any horror film for about 5 years after that, because I was like, is that what horror films are like? Well, fuck that. Because that was crazy. You can't do that in a theater. And so upsetting. So yeah, it has always remained a very high bar for me. And I have to admit, when this came out, I treated this badly because I was skeptical about anybody following up to The Exorcist, and Exorcist 2 poisoned the well so completely that you were like, they can't. They just aren't going to. With distance, I have really come to love this movie because I do think it's a very smart exploration of, if you did cast the demon out and it were to get hold of Karras's body and put a serial killer in there, what an awful perverted way to get revenge on Karras for what he did. And if you didn't, what an awful thing to put in Kinderman's head. And what a terrible game the whole thing is. Like, it's a really smart, interesting, personal sequel that doesn't feel driven by studio notes.
No, right up until the very end, in which the entire end sequence is in fact driven by studio notes.
Yes.
To the point where, they drag a man who is Jason Miller at the time. He was unfortunately an alcoholic. And you hear in interviews that, he wasn't really able to memorize the dialogue. He sort of quote unquote wet brain had set in with him. Yeah. And so there's a lot of performance that's created in editing out of that reshoot sequence. This is where I think you get the shot in the arm that is Brad Dourif. Like, you can't underestimate how much Brad Dourif can do in your movie than sitting someone down and having them watch any minute of film that he has in this.
Well, and he's not introduced until fairly late in the running time. And then all the tools that you give actors, their hands and their body language and all these things. Yeah. He's in a straitjacket and he's shackled. And so for a lot of it, he's not even able to be mobile or do much. And he's magnetic. He's absolutely terrific here.
Every time I watch this again, I am just struck by the fact that he's crying through most of his dialogue, and it's so unsettling.
His big monologues are incredible, and they go. He's one that ends with, he takes a breath and he kind of looks around and he's like, "I'm sorry, was I raving?" Is fantastic work, and the idea that he's kind of both inside and outside his body at the same time and kind of watching the show just like we are, that's kind of a perverted thing that he's playing that he's really good at, because it's constantly, he's aware of the show he's putting on.
He is at that point trying to drive home how much he is clearing the sand away underneath everyone's feet. Like, you think you know what's going on, but I promise you, it is so much worse than you have any idea. And he does movies today. I hate to be that guy, but maybe I shall be that guy for a second. Would have immediately told you, I bounce out of this body into another body. That's how I get around. And you won't know where I strike next. Like, they will not hide the weenie in any way, shape, or form. They will just tell you what the fuck is going on. This movie is like, you're going to have to figure that out as Kinderman figures that out.
Yeah, there's little clues dropped like everywhere.
Yeah, I would say it took me. It didn't help that, like I said, we had it at our theaters, so I watched it in bits and pieces, and then sat down about a week into its run, watched the whole thing, and then kept watching bits and pieces, and I just remained confused by it. It was a movie where I'm like, I know it adds up, like but it's really not conventionally laid out. And it does. You have to really pay attention to all the little pieces Bloody lays out there, but they're all in the movie.
You also have to kind of decipher what's really happening, what isn't really happening. Most movies just don't go, hey, we're going to go to a train station in between heaven and hell. Now, hold on for a second. Now I'm going to get an NBA player and the guy from those romance novels. They're angels.
I always forget that's in there.
And Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah. I always forget that scene's in the movie. I just watched it today and I forgot that scene's in the movie.
Oh, that's like one of my favorite scenes because like the dream sequence in the first one, it's just like, it's so like,
it's wild. Yeah.
I mean, when Kinderman goes, I'm sorry that you were murdered.
Yeah.
Like they just falls out of his mouth. Like this is something you would say, but it isn't something you would say in reality. It would only be something that would happen, that you would witness your subconscious doing in a dream. And all of it is not sort of a gory, nightmarish world sort of dream sequence. It's not Suspiria. It's this other thing. And where in the original film, there was a documentary feel to it. Here, there's a painterly feel to it. And it's like they're playing off different ends of a tennis court game. They're just batting ideas and concepts and filmmaking techniques back and forth. There's a real conversation happening between these two movies. And that doesn't make it easier. It makes it more interesting. And for all of us, I'm sure was, a little bit of our brains started flowing out of our ears as we watched it the first time.
Well, I think Friedkin is a filmmaker and like lives and breathes cinema. Whereas I think William Peter Blatty is a playwright first. And I think there's a lot of theater in him. So both Ninth Configuration and this to me feel like theater pieces where you're allowed to debate ideas and you're allowed to just put two people in a room and have them bounce something back and forth. And that's drama, that he can find all the meat on that bone. He knows that this movie really boils down to the conversations in the room between patient X and Kinderman. And if the movie's going to work, it's got to work in those scenes or nothing else matters. The rest of it's just window dressing.
Technical skill on display, which I don't know that he had the technology to accomplish in Ninth Configuration.
It feels like he definitely learned between films. And
yes.
Yeah, just that there's a greater sense of visual ambition. You're correct.
The helicopter dance, which is that are they doing maneuvers? Are they a part of a search of some kind? You don't really know why these three helicopters are hovering so close over the water and buzzing the buildings and circling around. You just know like their presence seems wrong. This shouldn't be happening. And that is replicated throughout the movie where you're constantly seeing things that don't add up. And that's really kind of the point, is these leftover integers that create their own little math off to the side that throw everything off kilter.
Well, there's that great early scene when Canavan, is it Canavan? Father Canavan, right. Who is the priest that's killed at the beginning. There is something so fundamentally upsetting about a priest in a confessional being attacked. And that becoming an unsafe space, because that is such a private, personal space for a Catholic and for somebody to go. And I think that's one of those moments where he really nails something that is hardwired into people. You know that space is sacred, that space is not to be invaded in that way. So it's great that he right away makes it so dangerous and terrifying.
Yeah. And the reaction shots of those two kids who are just like staring blankly, like they're from what is that island? Where all the kids are all born on the same day with blonde hair.
Village of the Damned.
Village of the Damned, yeah.
Village of the Damned.
Yeah.
They're on an island, sure. They just strike me as like some sort of Village of the Damned reference.
I thought
stone face.
I thought they looked like they should be on the cover of a V.C. Andrews novel.
Oh, sure. Right. Absolutely. And a scream that you don't know where it's coming from. I think all of the religious perversions here are much creepier than in The Exorcist, where it's kind of, we joked that it sort of looks like something out of Beetlejuice, the sort of cone breasts that are slapped onto the Virgin Mary.
I was gonna say that too, that I feel that the violation of the church and the sacred places is more gut-wrenching here than in the first movie. I would 100% agree with you.
Joker head on the saint.
Right. It's like with the old lady in the seal. You're laughing. You're like, why is that there? Oh God. What I mean?
Is this the joke? Is the joke on me? And you don't know. And so much of this is what you don't know working on you and working on you and working on you. If it doesn't work for you, I'll grant you, I don't think this is a movie that can and should work for everyone. It's one of those right down the middles where you're either into it or, oh man, that just doesn't work for me at all. And I think those are kind of valid tacks to take. But if it does work for you, baby, ooh, it works.
Well, we talked about when we covered the first Exorcist that, how much these movies are going to affect you really depends a lot on the role of religion in your life at some point.
Sure.
Now, whether, you are currently religious or no longer religious, it's going to affect you in different ways. If this seems all like a load of hooey, it's just going to be, yeah, this is pretty cool looking. I guess it's a little scary. But if at some point this was something you actually believed in yourself, it's going to kind of keep you up at night sometimes.
I have to highlight one of the most disturbing presences in this entire film. Every time I see it, a chill runs down my spine, and that is watching Larry King order a sandwich. It feels wrong. Like, I know this was a part of reality. Larry King ordered many sandwiches over the years, but to capture it, in sort of a verisimilitude, I still go, oh, suspenders, and my feet fly off the floor. Popcorn in the air. You had to get one joke in. No, the performance that constantly wears away at my nerves is Nancy Fish as Nurse Allerton.
Yeah.
Like, holy fuck. That is a very committed performance. Like,
it would be so nice if you were not here. I can't wait for you to go away. Yeah.
Wow. I cannot wait.
Right. They're also like in one of those classic horror movie hospitals where she seems to be working every ward. Like she's in the psych ward
24 hours a day. Yeah.
Yeah, she's in the psych ward. She's also taking care of a little kid. She's also taking care of geriatrics. She's always right. And again, maybe
she was there 15 years ago when a destitute guy.
And maybe the fact that she's constantly there is maybe that's on purpose. Again, to add to that sense of
that
unease.
would definitely explain the attitude, because man, I'm sure everybody is on her last nerve at this point.
Yeah,
that poor woman is overworked.
Always there.
They need a wider array of coworkers. they need to rotate. They need a lot of help there. And
they're down one entire nurse and a head at a certain point in this movie, so that does not help.
And that's gonna be more work on her plate.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things falling into plates in this motion picture. And because we covered Prince of Darkness a couple months ago, there's this thing that has begun to unnerve me a little bit. And it's a reliability on individuals who have mental difficulties or being used as a tool for evil, right? And Carpenter manages to taekwondo that in They Live into, oh, wait a second, there's an unhoused population, maybe not using them as the tool of a liquid devil, make them the good guys in a fight against late stage capitalism as committed by aliens. And here, I think it's just an of a time thing where, and it's from the book Legion, where because they have lower defenses, our Gemini killer is allowed to float into their bodies and manipulate them to commit all these crimes.
Yeah, it does seem like it, and especially that hospital seems like such a great target-rich environment for that, where people are just, everything's a little thin with them anyway. They are barely holding on to their mental capacities or their physical capacities. So, yeah, it seems like a perfect place for him to be able to do that.
I mean, that radio conversation that Gina mentioned earlier.
That's a telephone.
I love her.
Oh, she's
exactly
great.
That's exactly how I'm going to be when I'm 103 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna fuck with people
in
that old folks home so hard.
Mm-hmm. Just spring it up on that ceiling and just crawling around, having me a look-see. That is the same old lady, right? That's the radio lady that's on the ceiling, right?
It is.
Because at one point she kind of turns her head, looks, and she just smiles like, this is fun.
Creepy.
Totally.
Love it.
Oh man, the performances in this movie, everyone is in the parlance understands the assignment that they were given. I don't feel like there's a lot of I don't know what's happening here, or I don't know what is expected of me. The great George DiCenzo is here with constantly either wearing glasses or sunglasses, forever just unwilling to give up the information he has because he knows how Kinderman is going to react. Man, that is a wonderful play of two actors who are like, what's our thing? And they decide on what that thing is. And then it just, every scene plays out consistently. I love it.
I feel like Scott Wilson also comes in just making big choices here about how he's playing that dude. Big choices.
Oh my God.
And that should be the subtitle of the movie, is just big choices, because everybody
and they're indulged. Like if this is what you're gonna do, okay, you're gonna chain smoke, you're gonna refer to notes in the middle of a conversation. Make it happen.
You're a medical professional. You have a nudie photo on your office wall.
You get the feeling the only note he ever had for the cast was, okay, give it about 10% more. About 10% more.
I feel
a
like
lot of that for George C. Scott.
Yeah.
I feel like the Scott Wilson was handed the script for this. He came home, was looking through it, turned on the TV, and Twin Peaks came on, and he's like, looks up, looks back down the script, looks back up, looks down. I think I got this. And then just goes to set the next day. I'm ready.
What if in every scene I have a cigarette, but in my other hand is an invisible cigarette? Like it wants a cigarette in that hand also. And then my favorite bit out of this whole thing, straight out of Lloyd Bridges' An Airplane, is this picture of him on the wall next to him. Like there's so much quote unquote divine comedy happening here. Like all very intentional.
Well, the thing is that one of the weirdest scenes with him is when he's rehearsing what he's going to say to George C. Scott about how they came to find patient X. But then you realize later that he's rehearsing that for a reason, because he already knows who patient X is. Yeah. And so he's trying to sound like he's not lying. And, but what sounds funny ends up being sort of tragic later, because then he ends up committing suicide because, he was threatened with, hell and eternal torture if he didn't bring Kinderman to the devil.
Oh my God. It's just, it's unhinged in a very interesting and delightful way. He's at a very sharp point. And as such, like, all of the moves here kind of cut deeply. They work in the fashion that was designed for this motion picture. And I think the one part that feels slightly out of it because it was mandated by the studio is Nicole Williamson, who really only gets to that full bore foot to the floor Nicole Williamson we all know and love at the very end, where he just reaches deep into that throat voice and all of a sudden Merlin comes roaring out. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's why you hire Nicole Williamson. I think we all figured it out, everybody.
I just realized Nicole Williamson may be the junction point between John Boorman and William Peter Blatty.
No.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. A man who knows how to make a performance in ADR because Boorman doesn't like microphones on set for some fucking reason.
Oh, yeah. But definitely, I think they both appreciate a guy that will go that far for you when you give him permission. Yeah. Well, I just want to talk about for a moment the one thing that I would love to walk into the theater to watch, and I figured out exactly how to time it so that I could walk in and see it every single time and make sure that I wasn't opening and closing the door and distracting people right as it happened. But the jump scare. It's maybe one of my favorite jump scares I've ever seen in a movie. Mm-hmm. And watching it in the theater, every single time somebody would come out of their seat. It physically would cause somebody to get up. And that was incredible to me. Like I've seen a lot of good jump scares play out. I've never seen one as reliable as that.
Because I know it's become de rigueur to talk about it online. Like it's no longer a great hidden secret necessarily. But what is so incredible about it is its patience. It plays with how you perceive that hallway scene for a really long time.
There's lots of little red herrings too, little hand motions and things right at the edge of the like hallway. And it's like, is that a thing? Is that something? Mm-hmm. No, that's not a person. Wait, never mind. Okay. It's like he really screws with you.
Because people are crossing, you're becoming overly familiar with the shot. You become, over the course of that nearly 3.5 minutes, you really know what is supposed to be there, what isn't supposed to be there. And it takes so long in sort of normal cinematic pacing that you keep, okay, I know something's going to happen. Something's got to happen. Okay. Was that the thing? No, that she just disturbed somebody who was already asleep. Okay. Back out to the hallway. Someone's coming in. No, that's a cop. Oh, she's going to go over there. No, that's fine. She opens the door, starts to close it, looks in, closes it again, and then walks the other way. And the camera's like, oh, wait a second. And pushes right into that. And then comes out through the door. Like, oh my God, the timing, the patience, all of that takes. I know lots of filmmakers have studied the fuck out of that to try to make it work. And only a few people are really able to match that rhythm.
I think there's something really upsetting about the physical, how quick the person is who walks across the hall. It's not a slow move. They basically storm across the hall and then the camera move at the same time. It's the combination of those two things that it's physically jarring. And
the fact that we've been shown how those shears work and how the amount of damage it can actually do. Like you think about it mentally and then it shows you about to happen and you don't see anything. Like it should be studied in school. It's just that fucking good. And I don't think you get there without skill, without the pacing leading up to it, without the mood and every minute going towards that. Like that requires real directorial voice and patience.
In talking about the shears, that reminds me of a scene earlier in the movie when they determined that is the weapon that's being used, and again there's that buildup where George C. Scott's like, why does this have a label on? He goes, oh, that's new. It's new. Yes. It's a replacement. Yes. well, where's the other one? It's just like, and then, well, that's a good question, George. You know,
that is a real good question. And again, shows you why he's the detective in the movie and we're not, you know?
Right, but also why is no one looking for this?
This is a really poorly run hospital. Let's just come right out.
Do giant spring-loaded bone shears disappear often from hospitals?
Just order a new one. Just get in that catalog
that seems like
get
that
one
seems
over.
like a report should be filed.
Right.
And what catalog was that thing in? Because I'm pretty sure there's a watch list for anybody who gets that catalog in the mail.
It's that medical supply warehouse from Return of the Living Dead. That's where you get that. They have that in a box somewhere. They ship it off to you across the country. There's of course, everything that's on screen kind of works. And then you kind of get into that third act and the special effects, because they just start to get dodgy. They're not fully planned. Whatever, they were rushed, whatever it was. But perhaps my favorite is when George C. Scott is pinned against the wall and starts to get de-rezzed like he's in Tron.
That's the weirdest moment. And I actually did play the Blu-ray back today because I didn't remember the effect. And it is an oddball visual swing they take there.
Yeah.
He's just sort of like rippling, like.
Yeah. Yeah, and because he
like,
doesn't do it at all for the rest of the movie, which is why it's such a strange choice. It's like it's like if in Altered States he had just done the arm thing one time and then never again for the whole rest of the movie, and they never referred to it, or it's just such a strange choice.
It's like something needs to happen here is what you feel the studio note was. Mm-hmm. You can't just pin him up against the wall. Something has to happen to him. And someone's like, I don't know, we like de-res him like he's in Tron. Like, sure, okay. That's a choice, I guess. We have a thing on this show where we happen to come across a lot of what we call phantasm pits. This is where the floor disappears and all of a sudden there's a ghostly netherworld underneath. Usually it happens with beds, like in Nightmare on Elm Street, where all of a sudden Freddy has the ability to make a fucking phantasm pit. Sure, why not? Here, lightning strikes the tile floor and all of a sudden a phantasm pit opens up. And then what I always forget until the last second is you actually see that poor Trent kid headless with that Sambo, blackface, Christ thing. Like, oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's now I can't unsee it, but my brain's like, no, you don't need this here, and yanks it away until the next time I watch the movie.
The way that final sequence, and I know it's because, we're looking at a lot of fingerprints on that scene, but the way it plays to me, it always feels like when I was younger, I would go to one of my grandmother's houses who had cable, and we didn't have cable yet. And I would stay up as late as I could to watch any movie that I could. And I would always fall asleep in front of the television. And then I'd wake up at like 4:45 because there was a loud noise, and I'd wake up and some crazy shit would be happening on my TV, and I would have zero context for any of it. And typically it would be like an Italian something, and I'd be like, why does the monkey have a straight razor? And then I go back to sleep, and it would just be like, and so that's how I would remember those bits and pieces of movies. That's how the whole ending of this film feels. It feels like I'm nodding in and out of a scene and I'm only getting parts of it. So
yeah, I mean, we've got a pretty understated as far as violence is concerned movie. I mean, everything is more implied than shown.
Absolutely.
And then we get a priest getting like half his skin peeled off like he's in a Hellraiser.
Yeah, he's getting peeled like an orange on that ceiling. That's the
little Greek chorus that comes out of the floor with Jason Miller looks like in Scrooged when the Ghost of Christmas Past opens its robe and you see the people inside the robe in his ribcage. They look almost identical.
Oh God, the way his face peels away.
When you talk about sort of how graphic the ending of this movie gets, it's so strange because up until then, I honestly feel like this film almost skirts PG-13 territory. It's so not graphic in terms of how they handle even the ideas of what the shears do and stuff. It's largely implied, not shown. I think this movie could have gotten away with it, except somebody at the studio realized, oh my God, we have to get an R. It's The Exorcist, right?
Everything that is incongruous with this really feels like Morgan Creek, pushing and prodding and going, well, this isn't what we signed up for. And I have to wonder, like, you had the script. You knew the person who was directing this.
Yeah.
You knew what his intentions were. So when you're it just seems to me like someone goes, well, I know what The Exorcist is, and this isn't The Exorcist. Like, yeah, he's making Legion, everyone.
It's the Halloween 3 problem, where you made a good film, but the title sets a table that some of the audience just isn't going to be able to get past. Like, they're just not going to be able to get their heads around the fact that it's not the thing that the other thing called this was.
And it's just not allowed, in the Halloween sense, it's not allowed to be an anthology. But oh my God, the movies we could have had
I know.
Halloween was a fucking anthology. Oh my God. We were so fucking robbed. So robbed. Fucking Universal. Drew, weren't you a tour guide for a bit?
I was a tour guide. I did Halloween Horror Nights first in 91.
Okay.
And I was Leatherface and ended up winning best scare in the park because they put me in the best place. And so I got to just scare the shit out of tourists. It was phenomenal. Put me inside of a long metal storage container. And when I heard the tram go by, I would start the chainsaw inside the metal container. So it just was amplified. And then they had me in a safety line so I could run down the metal container, pop out the door, and jump at the tram and not quite reach it and get yanked back at the last second. And I was so sore by the end of it every night, but it was so much fun. And and then after that became a tour guide, was there while they were shooting Jurassic Park.
Okay.
So it was right around that time, 92 and into 93, and worked there through basically the end of that year. Loved it. Terrific job.
Yeah. I was there 96 when the ride, Jurassic Park, the ride opened.
Okay. All right.
And then I bounced around and ended up going to Japan and opening Universal Studios Osaka. But
oh wow. Okay.
One of the last things I did was the first reopening of Halloween Horror Nights, because it had an accident and they couldn't figure out how to do it. But Orlando was doing so well with it. They finally kind of figured it out. So that was the first year back. And the horror history at Universal is so rich and vaunted. And, occasionally they like the big thing was like, we're going to open a House of 1,000 Corpses maze because we have this movie. And then they ended up shelving the fucking movie, but you still have a maze based on it. It's just a miscalculation where people go like, I know what horror is, but when they see it, and that was a long way to go for that. But it's one of those things where people have an idea of what horror is, and then you're actually confronted with the very elastic nature of what horror can actually do. And this is why I think doing The Exorcist has been an interesting diversion for us, because it is a many tentacled thing. It's an accordion that allows you a whole lot of space to dip into comedy, to dip into the surreal. And not everyone is attuned to how far and how stretchy horror can get. They have a linear thing. Horror is this. I mean, we've seen it just the past week with Malignant, where people are like, it was already going to be a 50-50 of whether you were into it or not. But then you always have the horror isn't this. And it's like, fuck you. It sure is. It fucking is. I can give you a dozen examples that it's that.
I agree. I think it's it is my favorite genre simply because of the elasticity and because I think you can talk about anything. There's any topic that you want to talk about, especially topics that are big, important, significant, real things that affect our literal everyday lives. I think you can talk about them in horror. And I think that's one of the safest places you can do it, because you can wrap it in monsters and tentacles and goop, and you can have the big scary conversation, and it's a little less scary somehow. And I think putting a name on these things really helps. Blighty really takes this seriously, and so many possession movies are supernatural light shows. They're just designed to, you get the low end rumble and the monster end of it, and it's designed to be gory and gross. And I think he really is more interested in the spiritual damage done by any encounter with evil, by actually having to debate it, by having to get in there and have conversations with it. What kind of rot does that create? And I think, Kinderman, by the end of the movie, having to pull the trigger on Karras, it doesn't matter, because no matter even if let's take it all as literal. Let's say that it actually is the Gemini killer in actually Karras's body, and that Kinderman has to do this. It is such a magnificent loss for him, because not only will he lose his livelihood and his career and most likely go to jail, but it's his best friend that they've made him do this to. It's such a victory in every sense of the word on behalf of Patient X. It's a pure win. To me, that's real horror. There is something great about pushing somebody past their breaking point, and there's no way for them to get out of it. It's the only way it's the only thing he can do. And my God, what a terrible thing to do.
That's where I feel its greatest connection to the original Exorcist, and it's just not visceral enough for some. But for me, the idea that he's already weary of the world that he lives in, the idea that seeing innocence corrupted, that his friend's been stolen from him, the loss of comfort in increasingly uncomfortable circumstances with particularly terrible coworkers, just seeing death pile up in front of him is beginning to remove his humanity. And the idea that the only way he can possibly regain it is to shoot his best friend in the head that he thought died 15 years ago. That's a real fucking gut punch, baby. They don't make those every day.
That's a bummer.
No. And on that note, let's liven things up. Why don't we? Let's play Choose Your Own Deathventure. And that is where we decide, of the many deaths presented, strangely enough, in The Exorcist III, if you were to die in one of those ways, which one would you choose and why? Now, we have a lot of decapitation going on here. We've got decapitation plus being having ingots driven into your eyes and being crucified on rowing oars, which is a lot. That's a lot for anyone. You've got decapitation, having your middle finger chopped off in confessional, and then we have having your head chopped off and having your bodily organs taken out and rosaries stuffed in and sewn back.
That's a lot of rosaries.
That's a lot of rosaries.
That's a lot of rosaries.
She's not a big gal or anything like that, but rosaries don't take up a ton of room. So
they're like the size of a necklace.
Well, quite literally. And then who else? Well, we have our Gemini killer who is shot 3 times to the body, 1 to the head. We also have Nicole Williamson's father mourning, who's peeled like an orange.
Let's assume that he died. I mean, we don't see him take his last breath, but
I really hope he did. Yes.
Yeah, those are not survivable injuries.
Really pulling for death in that case.
We have all your blood being pumped out of your body until there's barely any a drop left, and then you get your head chopped off. And then I think that's all of them. Dr. Temple commits suicide, but then we're not including that. That's ridiculous. He isn't killed. He kills himself. So we're taking that right off the table. Besides, I don't want any of you to smoke as much as he did.
That was the one I was going to pick.
Well,
none of them
don't make it
none
easy
of them are good.
No, they're all bad. And so which one are you going to choose? Drew, you're our guest. You get to go first.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go with the nurse in the hallway. And here's why. Okay. Because while I do think there's a good chance that, as the Gemini killer explains, he's going to play with my head and shit for a while, and I'm going to get to watch stuff, and
sure,
it's not going to be great. I get the feeling the actual decapitation part is going to be super quick, because it looks like it's going to be maybe another 2 seconds after what we see in the film. So I'm hoping that one at least goes fast. I get it over with. I get to watch a little something, and then I'm out. And so many of the others seem like there's a lot of involved busy work, ingots and blood pumping, and too much. Just get it done, get me out. I'm good.
Yeah, everything's going to happen to you after the fact. And the bonus is very comfortable shoes.
Absolutely.
Pillows on your feet, baby. That's the way you want to go. Gina, what say you?
Well, I would normally say, because I am a big fan of showmanship, as I mention often when we cover our episodes of Hannibal. I would say initially that I would take Father Dyer, but I am really stuck on that whole, well, they shot them full of this medication that paralyzes you, but you're awake and aware. Which I would say that is one of my worst fears, but I think that as reasonable human beings, that is everybody's worst fear of being unable to move, but aware of and able to feel what is happening to your body. So thank you, sir. I will not be taking that exit. So, I mean, if I say, shot 3 times, does that mean I have to go through 15 years of suffering up to that point?
I mean, I don't know how he goes to the bathroom. I think that's the biggest thing for me. He doesn't look to be wearing comfortable clothes.
I mean, that cell looks pretty cruddy. Yeah. I think they just let him go right there.
A lot of electronic equipment, so it's really wired. So you got that going for you.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to take just shot 3 times. And I get to spend a lot of time monologuing beforehand. And as you know from doing this show with me for 5 years, I do like to talk.
See, that's why I'm going that way too, because I love a good, Irene Ryan monologue, and I get sheets and sheets and sheets of words to memorize. Plus, sitting around for 15 years getting shot full of drugs, like, okay, I'm fine.
And the best part is you have other people doing your work for you. and also I'm a very easy crier, so in addition to that, all that monologue I would be doing with just the tears just flowing.
And I do look good with curly hair. I learned that once upon a time in my theater days. So that just about does it. Before we go, let's do some plugs. Drew, you've got a lot going on currently, and you produce a lot of cool content. Why don't you tell people what you're doing and where they can find it?
Well, thank you, sir. First, you can find me at drewmcweeny.substack.com, which is my formerly dangerous newsletter. And that is my current film reviews. I'm also doing a lot of classic film reviews and a lot of cultural commentary. I'm trying to write about the industry with the idea being that I feel like most of what you read these days is marketing. It is all written before a film comes out. It is all designed to be read and digested before a film comes out. And then by the time you can actually talk about the movie, the media's moved on. They're on to selling you the next thing. And I really feel like the conversation is backwards. So I'm trying to do that with Formerly Dangerous and get back to the notion that it's a conversation. It's not a lecture. It's, you should be able to see the movies we're talking about as well. That makes sense to me. And then the other thing that I'm doing is for anybody who enjoyed 80s All Over, the podcast that I was part of with Scott Weinberg, we were just not able to finish the podcast. So I have now gone back and I'm doing the project as a newsletter. And that is at thelast80snewsletter.substack.com. And I've started with January of 1980. I'm going to review every single film of the decade, everything, big, little stuff you've never heard of, stuff that you've heard us talk about 5 million times, 2,800 film reviews over the course of the decade. So $5 a month for that. And I think it's an insane value.
I agree with that. I am part of the Formerly Dangerous, and I really enjoy the 80s stuff as well. I just think you're a very good writer, and I think you're very considerate of film. And I enjoy what you bring to it, and the reverence and irreverence that you use to talk about it. I encourage everyone to give it a whirl. I think it's definitely worth the price of admission.
There are free ones you can check out. And then if you like it, if you sign up for both, it's a grand total of $10 a month. So, I mean, come on.
It's a bargain at twice the price. Gina, where can people find you on these here internets?
I am a writer at thespool.net. So my recent reviews are the not at all polarizing Malignant.
No one has
no one had strong opinions on that whatsoever.
It's so conventional.
It really is.
And I will
seen it a million times.
By the time, I know. Come on, man. I've seen it. Yeah, I mean, show me something new. But by the time this goes up, I will have written a 40th anniversary retrospective on my favorite horror movie, Mommy Dearest.
There you go.
And
nice.
I will be covering Mike Flanagan's new joint. The name of which has suddenly slipped my mind. So
Midnight Mass.
Thank you. I'm doing very well this evening. Thank you very much. I'm also on Twitter under Porcelain72 and on Instagram under Gina Does Things. GENA Does Things.
Do it today, people. Check it out. You can find us on your socials. We have the TeePublic store for all of our t-shirts. Rate and review us on iTunes. Tell us what your favorite death was in this movie or any of the ones we covered or not covered. If you do that, we will talk about your review on the air. That is our solemn promise to you, the Kill by Kill listener. But don't worry, folks. Just because we're saying goodbye, the body count will continue. For myself, for Gina, and for Drew, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.